Howdy, and welcome to Brandy's Book Stack. Today, I'm going to talk about the books that I read in the month of April. So hopefully you'll enjoy going along with me as we jump into the stacks. So first, I read Whose Body by Dorothy L. Sayers. This is a great mystery novel. Many people compared Dorothy L. Sayers to Agatha Christie. I think that's a bit unfair, for the record. I don't think anyone comes close to Agatha Christie, but Dorothy L. Sayers does write a good mystery novel, and I would recommend reading it. I would just recommend, if you've never read anything by her before, to go ahead and just view her on her own merits and don't compare her to Christie. In that novel, we follow Lord Peter Wimsey, who is an aristocrat who tries to solve mysteries as a way to entertain himself and also to kind of combat the PTSD he experienced from the war. This is really good. I love how this book talks about mental health. Lord Peter Wimsey is a strong, intellectual, smart character who also happens to have what we would call today PTSD. And yet, he's still portrayed as strong and intelligent and smart and the good guy in this story. And I think that's wonderful, especially for a book written at that time. In addition, there are some problematic elements to this book. The story focuses on the body of a man found naked in the bathtub of a middle-class man who has no idea who the body belongs to, how it got there, and is just completely befuddled about how that happened. And this body bears a resemblance to a wealthy Jewish banker who has gone missing. Now, there are some anti-Semitic comments about the banker in the book. Nothing really negative, but it's that sort of, oh, I always liked him, even though he was a Jew. Things that today we go, oh, that's cringy. So just be aware of that before you pick up the book to read it. But otherwise, it's a very good story, and you have to kind of consider the time it was written in. But it was an excellent novel, and I really did enjoy it. I would have given it about 4 stars, in my opinion. Going to the next thing that I read, Murder on the Links by Agatha Christie. This is a great Poirot novel, the second Poirot novel, and I really, really enjoyed this one. I think it's my favorite Poirot that I've ever read. And it's just kind of a simple whodunit mystery. It's a man who hires Poirot to come and assist him because he thinks someone's trying to kill him, and surprise, surprise, someone does. And then Poirot tries to solve the murder. And there's lots of red herrings as to who this murderer can be. And of course, the man is murdered and found in a bunker, a golf bunker, thus leading to the title. But if you're worried this might have too much about golf in it, it really doesn't have anything about golf at all. You do not have to enjoy golf to enjoy this book. I was a little worried about that and didn't need to be. Really good, 5 out of 5 stars for me. Of course, I always love Agatha Christie, though, so I might be a bit prejudiced in that regard. But it is a really good book. Next, I read the book Forgotten Planet by Murray Leinster. I read this for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club over on Michael K. Vaughan's channel. If you aren't familiar, Michael K. Vaughan, he hosts a book club that is completely free. All the books are available on Gutenberg, and you can download them for free and read them. And I'm participating in that club. I think it's a great idea. This particular book was not one that was really up my alley. I don't read a lot of pulp or adventure books, which this is one. But I did enjoy this book a lot more than I really expected to. It was a good novel, and it was what they call a fix-up novel, where they bring kind of 2 novels and mash them together to give you one really full-length novel versus a novella. And it's about a planet that has, as the name would imply, has been forgotten. They began terraforming it and seeding it with insect and marine life and plant life, but then it got misfiled and they never continued the terraforming and the biological life that they needed to have mammals and things of that nature. And then hundreds or thousands of years later, I don't remember which, a plane crash lands on the planet and nobody comes to their rescue. And the book opens following one of their ancestors who have now devolved to the point that they're just merely eking out a survival without really much thought, just getting what food they can, and that's it. And we kind of follow them as they begin to develop thought and develop leadership and develop culture, which is really interesting. It was an interesting take, I thought, for the book. And again, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I'd say this is about a 3-star for me. The next book that I read in the month of April is Sprig Muslin by Georgette Heyer. Georgette Heyer, I kept hearing wonderful, wonderful things about, and finally got an opportunity to read one of her books. I picked this up for not very much money. I want to say $5 or $6 at the most. And we follow a man who was a fiancé to a young woman who died, very abruptly right before they were about to get married. And he's just devastated and doesn't feel like he can ever love again. And yet he is a lord, and so the societal expectation is that he will get married and have children to, continue his name. And he doesn't, he's the most eligible bachelor in town. He's wealthy, he's kind, he's funny, he's good looking, and yet, even though he has tons of suitors that would be willing to accept his hand in marriage, he doesn't feel comfortable offering to any of them because he knows he could never return the love that they would be looking for. So he decides to offer his hand in marriage to a young woman who's been, quote, left on the shelf. No one has asked to marry her. She's getting old. I think she's 27, really old in the book. And he knows that he's a friend of hers. He knows that he likes her as a friend. He knows that she's living in abysmal circumstances. Her mother has passed. Her father is kind of a jerk. Her brother is kind of a jerk. His wife, kind of a jerk. And she knows she'll end up having to go and live with her sister who has massive amounts of children, and she'll be responsible for their caretaking. And so he thinks, this is a great idea. I'll offer you my hand in marriage. And, that solves that problem for you. You'll understand why I can't love you, but I will better your circumstances, make you mistress of your own house. Won't that be great? Except maybe Hester's not real fond of that idea. And he goes, when he's on his way to offer his hand in marriage to Hester, the young woman in question, he meets another young woman, a really pretty young thing who wants to marry a captain and has run away from home because her grandfather won't let her. And he is sort of charged as a gentleman to try to take care of her and ensure she doesn't get into trouble, which is really hard, he comes to find out. And there's also the sort of societal taboo of a unaccompanied, unchaperoned woman being around a man who is not related to her that he has to address. But he can't just leave her. So there ends up being kind of this love triangle, if you will, between Sir Ludlow and Hester and the young woman, Amanda. And it's really interesting and it's really cute and just a light, fun read. This was 5 out of 5 stars for me. I would totally recommend this to anyone to read. It's just a whole heck of a lot of fun. I'd heard she wrote similarly to Jane Austen, and I was really skeptical, I have to admit. I thought this will probably just be a bodice ripper that happens to take place in the Regency era. No, it really wasn't. The writing here is really quality and the story's really good. Pick it up. I think you would enjoy it. The next book that I read was Fernando Pessoa's The Book of Disquiet. Now, I have very mixed emotions on this book. As you can see, I have tabbed it extensively. However, the reason I've tabbed this is because the prose is delicious. It is so beautifully written. This is not a novel. It is a book of sort of musings, prose musings, very akin to poetry. But it is in prose. And it's about 25% insightful musings on humanity and life, particularly the imaginative life. And then it's 75% whining. Awful, emo whining. And I thought the best way to kind of explain this book is to read some excerpts from it. Because it's not like a book with a plot you can just talk about. So I'll give you a little taste of what the Book of Disquiet has to offer. So here's sort of the good. And smiling to myself, I remember that life, which contains these pages with fabric types, prices and sales, blank spaces, letters and ruled lines, also includes the great navigators, the great saints, and the poets of every age, not one of whom enters the books, a vast progeny banished from those who determine the world's wealth. Pretty insightful. Then we go to the whining. I asked for very little from life, and even this little was denied me. A nearby field, a ray of sunlight, a little bit of calm along with a bit of bread, not to feel oppressed by the knowledge that I exist, not to demand anything from others, and not to have others demand anything from me. This was denied me. Like the spare change we might deny a beggar, not because we're mean-hearted, but because we don't feel like unbuttoning our coat. There's lots and lots of passages very similar and akin to that. Another passage, some of the good. Some govern the world, others are the world. Between an American millionaire, a Caesar or Napoleon, or Lenin, and the socialist leader of a small town, there's a difference in quantity, but not of quality. Below them there's us, the unnoticed, the reckless playwright William Shakespeare, John Milton, schoolteacher, Dante Alighieri, the tramp, the delivery boy who ran an errand for me yesterday, the barber who tells me jokes, and the waiter who just now demonstrated his camaraderie by wishing me well after noticing I'd drunk only half the wine. But back to whining. But to say it's a nice day is difficult, and the nice day itself passes on. It's up to us to conserve the nice day in a wordy, florid memory, sprinkling new flowers and new stars over the fields and skies of the empty, fleeting outer world. And then I have one more. I'm intuitively certain that for people like me, no material circumstance can be perpetuous, no situation have a favorable outcome. If I already had good reasons for withdrawing from life, this is yet another one. Those courses of events that make success inevitable in an ordinary man have an unexpected adverse effect in my case. So that gives you a little bit of a taste of some of the writing you might experience in Pessoa's The Book of Disquiet. If you're a big fan of Eeyore, if you are very emo and you enjoy sitting in the dark and brooding, this might be for you. Wasn't for me, not my cup of tea. I will say, be in a healthy mental place before you read this book. I felt like I was in a pretty healthy mental case, and this book negatively affected me. It negatively affected my mental health. Definitely read some light fiction around it. It's hard for me to say whether I'd recommend reading this book all in one go or whether I'd recommend reading it, just a little passage at a time. If you read it a little passage at a time, you have to live with it for a very long time. If you read it all in one go, that's a big gulp of disquiet. So I kind of would recommend taking a little bit of a middle ground with it and read maybe 25 pages a day or so until you're done with it, and then be done with it if you decide to pick it up. I gave this 2.5 stars. Again, just not my cup of tea, but some of the prose in here is really beautiful. He talks a lot about the imaginative mind and the importance of the imaginative mind over reality. And while I agree with that as a concept, going into the imagination can be a great solace. It can be a great source of inspiration. However, he takes it to such a far degree, to the point that he recommends that we avoid other people. They aren't in our imagination. We should just live with the people in our imagination. They're better than what we could deal with in the real world anyway. I'm sorry, but I think we need real people and connection with real people in our life. I think the pandemic taught us that, if nothing else did. And Pessoa did not live a particularly happy life. He even says in this book at one point, "Oh, nobody ever loved me. I wasn't lovable." At several moments in this book, I just wanted to give him a big hug. I have a bad feeling, although he did die of natural causes, kind of helped along by alcoholism, I really feel like if he hadn't, it's a good possibility he might have killed himself, because there's a lot of really depressing passages in here that might make you think that was where he was headed. So again, be in a very healthy mental place before reading the Book of Disquiet. So that's that. The next book that I read was Sanctuary, Volumes 1 and 2. This is a graphic novel from the 90s. I think 93 was when the first one was published. And it is a sort of crime noir gangster novel. It'd be how I would describe this. And we follow two young men, one of whom is a politician, Asami, and then the other is Hojo, who is a gangster. He is a Yakuza. And becomes clear pretty early on they are working together. For what ends, we're not exactly sure in the beginning. But we find out, and it says it on the back of the book, so I don't think it's too big of a spoiler, that these two young men both were refugees from the killing fields in Cambodia under Pol Pot. So it lends a little bit of a seriousness to this graphic novel. I should warn you, this book is very graphic. It's got quite a bit of nudity in it, although it's a little bit of a weird nudity sometimes. Sometimes the Japanese censors remove genitals from a nude, and unlike, I think in America we tend to put a potted plant there or something, there they just leave a blank white space, which kind of almost looks humorous. It also has a lot of violence, a lot of sex, and a lot of sexual violence. So if that's something that's going to make you uncomfortable, I would avoid this book. But it is a very interesting story of kind of how politics and being a gangster aren't that far apart. And also there's a lot of kind of, do the ends really justify the means in these books? But it's an interesting story, and they're pretty fast reads. They are pretty hard to find nowadays. They are out of print, and you can find some of them. I think there was one on Amazon that was going for about $50. So I don't know. I might be hard pressed to hold on to these if I could sell them for that much money. But that's Sanctuary. It was enjoyable. Like I said, I read volume 1 and 2, and I'll give you a bit of the interior and why I like it. I think the art in it is just very pretty. find another. And here, there's kind of another set. So that's Sanctuary. Last, but most definitely not least, I read Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. I think this would be my favorite book of the month. This is a really charming, cozy story about a small town called Cranford, where many women, mostly women, are living in genteel poverty. In other words, they are wealthy enough to have a servant and a nice house, but they have to scrimp and save for everything else. But they kind of help each other get along, and there's a real sense of community there, and each of the stories kind of highlights that. And it's just really cozy and warm and definitely worth reading. So it's not very long, so if you're looking for something light, if you do decide to read the Book of Disquiet, this is a great foil to that book. But Cranford, I would really highly recommend it. Worth reading, 5 out of 5 stars. So that's what I read this month. What have you read? Please let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. I'll see you next time. Bye.